Very good evening to all of you. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this third edition of the Capital Talk series, which is part of an effort for us to connect with some of the leading thought leaders of India and the world, and to be able to host it in our own facility, the JGU International Academy here at the Taj. We have a very, very distinguished and amazing man today to give this talk, Mr. Amitabh Kant. In so many forums, it does not need any introduction, but definitely not here. There are so many things that can be said about him, a very distinguished Indian Administrative Service officer. Of course, we all know the extraordinary contribution that he made towards the astounding success of the G20 summit. But for me, he remains the man who made the Kerala story possible. As somebody who is from Kanyakumari, the southernmost tip of India, I have been deeply inspired by what he made Kerala to be. For those of you who may not be aware, the extraordinary success of Kerala's global tourism as a destination to a large extent owes to Mr. Amitabh Kant, and so I want to give him a round of applause for that.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted to be in the midst of all of you. And the subject for today is India on the high table, leadership in G20. And I'd keep G20 a little in the background. We'll probably talk about it during question time. Let me start by saying that the world is actually geopolitically going through very radical changes. These are very seismic shifts which are taking place, and it's very important to discern them. And the first of which, to my mind, is that the big power rivalry is back center stage. The consensus built post World War II, which was the establishment of the United Nations and the post-Bretton Woods period, which led to the establishment through consensus of international financial institutions, all that has broken. And that is all broken because in the heart of Europe, you have a war which is going on for over 3 years now, almost. And the Russia-Ukraine crisis is the center of big power rivalry. So make no mistake about it, that this is the big shift from the big consensus that was built post-World War II, that you are going to see big power rivalry, which has led to complete freeze of the Security Council in the United Nations. And therefore, the United Nations as a body has, to my mind, become totally irrelevant as far as international policy making is concerned. The second important issue is to realize that this big power rivalry will, with this Middle East crisis, with the Israel-Gaza crisis, and the possible danger of its spread to other parts of the world, this has serious implications for the world, and you will see big power rivalry emerging there as well. And the third key threat is that China's assertion of its one China policy and the fact that it'll annex Taiwan at some point of time means that you will have a conflict scenario in Asia as well. So these are the dimensions of geopolitics. This is critical it's important to discern and comprehend this. The second key challenge before the world is that globalization as we'd known it in the last 4 decades, which had enabled us to do global trade, which had enabled vast number of people to be lifted above poverty line, which had led to trade happening across, and which led to the emergence of global value chains, that has come to an end. And today, free trade global free trade agreements have frozen down. You have the World Trade Organization, which has become a failed institution. It has not made any progress at all. And the global supply chains remain disrupted. Countries are looking for resilient supply chain, which in other words means that you need trusted partners to trade with. And you will therefore see that increasingly the concept of globalization itself is being questioned because the appellate dispute resolution body of the World Trade Organization is not being accepted by even the champion of free trade, which is United States. And you are seeing countries going and doing bilateral trade agreements rather than believing in multilateral trade organizations. The third key feature, to my mind, is that multilateralism is under huge stress. Multilateralism is being challenged. And therefore, United Nations as a body or World Trade Organization as a body, all of them are being challenged in very severe ways. And probably the only multilateral body which has been able to arrive at consensus on a vast range of issues was the G20 during India's presidency, and I'll dwell on it a little later. But the third key feature to my mind is that the world is also seeing the emergence of a range of new technologies. And this is artificial intelligence, generative AI, quantum computing, blockchain. All of them can enable the world to proceed at very high levels of productivity and actually transform the lives of citizens across the world. So these can have huge repercussions in terms of productivity, in terms of growth, in terms of transforming lives of people. They'll also have huge implications in terms of creation of jobs. And the challenge for the world is that the ethical assumptions behind these technologies will be very critical. And therefore, while they all have their positives, it's necessary for the world to do regulation in a manner that we continue with innovation without having the consequences of disruption or consequences which can lead to disruption of both in terms of economies as well as in terms of conflicts. And therefore, this would require a huge amount of multilateral effort. No individual nation can do it, and therefore you'd require multilateral effort to bring in innovative regulatory regimes for these technologies. So these are the three critical things. If you look at the world around us, it's important to also comprehend that the post-COVID era has seen a vast number of people falling below the poverty line. Some estimates say that actually about 150 million people have gone below the poverty line. We've seen over 100 million people lose their jobs. And therefore, the COVID era has had huge impact on the lives of citizens across the world. The Sustainable Development Goals, which were to be achieved by 2030 instead of progressing, have actually regressed. And therefore, we are way behind. Only 12 of the 170 odd SDGs are on track, and therefore the world is way behind on the Sustainable Development Goals. And you need very accelerated action to push the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. And therefore, to my mind, for the leaders of the world, the challenge is how do you transform lives of citizens? Sustainable Development Goals will be critical. But there's a huge challenge in terms of the world facing a major slowdown of growth. So if you look at Europe, you will see Germany facing a crisis. You will see UK facing a crisis. You will facing, the global economy is seeing a huge slowdown of growth. And without accelerating growth, it will be very difficult to push for sustainable development goals. It will be very difficult to lift people above poverty line. And therefore, how do you do sustainable, balanced, inclusive growth will be the challenge before the world. But at the same time, there are close to about 90 countries suffering from a global debt crisis. 90 countries of the world are facing a global debt crisis, and this is going to be a huge challenge for these countries because these countries will slip back very severely in due course. And then you have the challenge, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, you have a challenge of food, fuel and fertilizer in many parts of the world. I mean, Europe is badly impacted, and it's important to comprehend how this impact is taking place. Because if you look at the global GDP, there is only one country in the world which has maintained its position at close to about 25 to 26% of its share in the global GDP, and that's the United States of America. Europe's share actually in the last 2.5 decades has come down from about 30% to 14% and expected to decline further. Whereas China's share has moved up from 3.5% to close to about 18%, but is now coming down. And India is now accelerating its share of global GDP from 4.5% upwards. So what you would see in the global GDP is that there's one country which is critical, and that is which has maintained its share. That is the United States of America. So these are the challenges, but one of the biggest challenges before the world would be the challenge of climate action and climate finance. Because if we are not able to achieve 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050, the Earth may survive, but we as human beings will get extinct over a period of time. And therefore, several countries will severely get impacted. And therefore, the challenge for the world is to grow, but grow in a sustainable manner and ensure that the world is able to meet 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that's, to my mind, critical. So these are the challenges before the global world. And in the midst of all these challenges, all the fault lines of the world, to my mind, if you look at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, if you look at the Middle East-Gaza crisis, if you look at climate action, and if you look at global supply chains, in all these crises, a lot will be dependent on how the American voters vote. You can have climate denial. You can have the Russia-Ukraine war getting settled in a fortnight. You can see that the global value chain can even get worsened, and therefore, the key player, to my mind, a very important player in all this, will be the United States and how it plays out in the coming elections of the United States of America. But ladies and gentlemen, the subject for us today is India on the high table. And therefore, I'd like to stress on this bit on India on the high table. And when you want to be on the high table, it's very important that I've been a long-term believer that geopolitics is essentially a function of your economic growth. You can't be a leading player on the high table without economic growth. And therefore, you need sustained growth over a long period of time. Now, India is today close to a $4 trillion economy, but its aim is to be a $30 trillion economy by the time it becomes 100 in 2047. And if it becomes a $30 trillion economy, or as some economists have analyzed that actually it will become a $35 trillion economy, it will take the per capita income of its citizens from close to about $2,800 to about $22,000. So it would have lifted the boat in entirety and changed and transformed the lives of every citizen. So what has India done in recent times? And let's look at the last decade, for instance. And to my mind, what India has done is firstly it's carried out huge number of structural reforms. It brought in the goods and services tax, which has actually replaced about 28 taxes and 18 cesses, and simplified the tax system, one tax across the country. But in reality, what it has led to is that the number of taxpayers have increased from about 6.5 million to about close to 16 million. And the GST has shown consistent level of growth month on month on month, and we've recorded the highest tax collection this month, but it's grown at about 18% plus month by month by month. So it's quite a achievement in terms of having one GST. The second thing India did was to introduce the insolvency and bankruptcy code, which has brought in a huge amount of credit discipline, and it enables companies which are commercially non-viable to die out. But it's led to a huge new culture of credit where new entrepreneurs who are not able to succeed but have borrowed money from banks are able to liquidate themselves. And this, to my mind, was very important for a country like India. So IBC has been a very critical reform. The third key reform has been the Real Estate Regulation Act, because in India, builders used to take money from middle-class people and not provide them houses, and therefore a lot of middle-class families used to suffer. But now you can't start the building without take money from consumers till you've not done the due diligence under the Real Estate Regulation Act, and the regulator then permits you. And that, to my mind, has brought a huge discipline in the real estate sector of India. The fourth key thing India did was to reduce the corporate tax. It brought it on par with global levels, and probably today India has the best corporate rates of taxes. And I'm saying this because a decade before this, India suffered from the twin balance sheet problem. And that was that the bank balance sheets were very poor. People had borrowed money and not returned them, and therefore there were huge NPAs, and that led to the bank's performance getting very adversely affected, and the corporate balance sheet was very adverse. All the corporates were in a very severely adverse position, and their balance sheet was badly hit, and therefore you had to ensure that both the banking sector and the private corporate sector radically improves. India also suffered from the challenge of fiscal deficit and of revenue deficit, both at that particular time, and it was termed as one of the fragile 5 countries a decade back. So what it has done in a decade is firstly these structural reforms which has carried out, and one of the key structural reforms, in addition to GST, IBC, RERA, corporate rates being brought down, has been a huge focus on the ease of doing business. It's scrapped a lot of rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork, made India very easy and simple. In FDI, it allows almost 95% of the FDI to come in through the automatic route. So huge structural reforms were carried out. The second big thing that's happened in India is a huge focus on infrastructure. It's been the post-COVID era has seen a huge focus on infrastructure, but the decade story is a story of infrastructure creation. So India in the last 8 to 9 years has created close to about 40 million houses, which is like almost creating one Australia in India. That's more than the population of Australia. It has created about 120 million toilets, which is like creating a complete Germany of toilets in India. And it has provided piped water connection to 253 million Indians, which is like providing piped water connection to the entire population of Brazil. That's been the size and scale. But it has built close to about 80,000 kilometers of roads, expressways, highways, etc. 80,000 kilometers of roads is like making Indian roads 3 times over. That's been the size and scale of what India has done. It's also been able to provide electricity to all its citizens, close to about 30 million citizens. So the transformation of India in terms of its infrastructure creation has been enormous, and it's taken the GDP, the capex spend, the capital expenditure spend, as a percentage of its GDP from 1% to close to 4%. And government has done most of the push towards infrastructure creation because the post-COVID era, the private sector was not coming forward to invest. But having given it a kick and led to the last 3 quarters, leading to about 8.4% growth over the last 3 quarters, what you are now seeing is hugely improved private sector balance sheet. So the bank balance sheets have never been in such good condition. The corporate balance sheets have never been in such good conditions as now. And once the private sector investment, which is now kicking in, really takes off, then you will have a decade of spiraling growth on the back of private sector investment. And therefore, my view is that the government has done the heavy lifting, and now the private sector will come in and do the heavy lifting for a decade or so on the back of good balance sheet of the banks, so that companies will get debt in a very sound, logical manner, and you'll get equity investments from Indian private sector companies, which has started to happen. So this is the infrastructure story of India. The third key point which has happened in India is that a huge amount of digitization has taken place. We are the only country in the world where everybody has a digital identity. Then between 2015 to 2017, we opened up 520 million bank accounts. And 520 million bank accounts means that 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world were opened in India. Every second bank account was opened in India, and then through a drive, we linked up both the digital identity and the mobile number of each individual to the bank account. Now, this was a lot of hard work for India. Opening bank accounts, and at that point of time, only 18% of the women in India had bank accounts. Today, 91% of the women in India have a bank account. So we then, because we had linked up both the digital identity and the mobile number, Indians started doing fast payments. And today, everybody uses the QR code or uses a UPI or Phone Pay or Google Pay or Amazon Pay to make payments. People don't use cash. And 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world happen in India. Last year, we did 130 million transactions, and that was about 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. And China was next with about 26. So you see the vast difference in what India has done. So many of us, like me, I've not been to a physical bank, or used my checkbook, or been to an ATM machine, or used my debit credit card for over 4.5 years now. I just use my mobile as a virtual bank. But, from the fast payment, a number of young startups actually started looking at the credit history at the history of payments and started giving credit. So you have young startups like MobiKwik, Pine Lab, all of them actually lend credit on the payment history. And all of them have become unicorns. And then you had a whole range of young unicorns like Zerodha, Grow, Upstock, all of them unicorns now, which started actually taking the stock market to Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. And they took it to rural areas. So they were able to take wealth creation to Tier 2, Tier 3 cities and rural areas. And actually, they control now about 31% of the stock market in India. And then you had another set of young startups like GoDigit and Acko, young entrepreneurs like many of you sitting here, who started doing insurance. And, you could do when I was a young officer, it used to take me 6 months to get a life insurance policy with so much of paperwork. But today, you can do a transaction in 30 seconds. You can do a stock market transaction in 30 seconds. You can get a credit in 1 minute. You can get an insurance policy in 1 minute in India. Nowhere else in the world does this happen. Nowhere else in the world, because India has built up this unique digital public infrastructure, which is open source, open API, which is globally interoperable, and which, to my mind, is the model of the future, because this model ensures through a techno-legal solution that the data remains with the citizen, and he gives permission for the use of that data. It's a techno-economic solution. and the world will move towards this open source model, and the world will move away from the big tech model of the United States, which in the last, 3 decades, all the innovations have come from Google, Meta, Apple, or Amazon in the western part of the world, and they've come from Tencent and Alibaba in China. But in all these cases, the data of the citizens has been taken over by the big tech, and they've used machine learning and AI for their commercial benefit. This does not happen in the digital public infrastructure model. And that is the model which has now been accepted by G20, the definition and framework of it, and which will go forward for the future of the world. So this has been the real digital transaction story of India, and that is why we could do 2.2 billion COVID vaccination, which is totally digital in India without paperwork during the COVID period. We could transfer money into the bank account of 800 million people during the COVID period. And we could actually, we do direct transfer of 657 schemes of the government directly into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries without any leakage in India. So this is enormous. Nowhere in the world does this happen, that government puts money straight into the bank accounts. Even during COVID period, in America, 18% of the checks came back, and Germany struggled for about 16 months to put money into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries. So what India has really done is a phenomenal creation of digital infrastructure, which is unparalleled. And this is the first time innovation of this nature has come from an emerging market. And this is, to my mind, a very notable transformation, because several digital public infrastructure have happened in many parts of the world, including Brazil. And what we are seeing today is that emerging countries have actually pushed the limits on digital transactions much faster than the developed world, who are caught up in legacy issues now. The fourth key aspects of India's story has been its huge transformation for climate action. And it's not a much talked about story, but India is the only G20 country which has been able to achieve its NDC target made at Paris 9 years ahead of schedule. And it's the only country in the climate change index which is in the top 10 of being on target for achieving its of having achieved what it had committed to. It's done about 187 gigawatt of renewable energy. It's built up very outstanding model of tripartite agreement between the state, the center, the private sector has built all this infrastructure, but a tripartite agreement between the center, the state, and the Reserve Bank of India allows that, and permits that in case the state discoms do not pay the money, it will be deducted from the state's account. We have one grid across the country. No other country in the world has that. United States doesn't have one grid. Europe doesn't have one grid. India is the only country which has one grid, so you can take renewable energy from one part of South India and give it to the northern part of India, and you can track it down. So the other thing India did was to see that we could electrify 30 million houses, and we could provide cooking gas connection to 110 million women in India who could transform their lives, because instead of cooking from firewood, we could give them cooking clean gas. So this energy transition has been a very big transformation. So to my mind, there are four key components of India's story of what makes it lead the way for the high table. One is the structural reforms. The second is the huge story of infrastructure creation. The third is that it's done a huge amount of digitization to transform the lives of citizens, to improve productivity, to ensure that there are no leakages. And the fourth is great focus on going, this energy transition, and therefore India's story is one of going green and going digital in a very big way. Why I'm saying this is because all these four of them converged together to make India grow at high rates of about 8.4% at a point of a global slowdown, when the global economy is slowing down. And At this point of time, India is an oasis of growth in the midst of a very barren economic landscape across the world. And what we are seeing in India is a once in a generation economic shift. It's a once in a generation economic shift towards high growth trajectory. And the challenge for India really is that it needs to sustain this and accelerate the pace of this in the next 3 decades to be able to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% year after year for 3 decades. Because if you don't grow at those rates of 9 to 10%, and the compounding power of growth is so enormous that if you grow at 6%, you will take your income, per capita income, from about close to $2,800 to about close to $14,000. But if you grow at about 10%, you take it to about $22,500. That's the compounding power of growth. And therefore, India needs to grow at those high rates for a very long period of time. So if you need to grow at those periods for a 3-decade period, and let me tell you, historically this has been done. It was done by Japan post-World War II. It was done by Korea later, and in recent times it was being done by China. But if India needs to do this, let me also say that there are several challenges, and it's important to highlight some of these challenges. If you want to be on the high table for over a long period of time, you have several challenges, and you need to confront those challenges. One is many of these countries had grown when the world was growing, when global trade was growing. And because global trade was growing, you could export and you could grow. That's the story of Korea, that's the story of China, that's the story of Japan, that they could penetrate global markets. India's growth story is taking place at a point of time when global trade has slowed down, when protectionism is coming, when global value chains are disrupted. So that's a huge challenge for India to accelerate the pace of its growth at a point of time when global trade has slowed down. And what does India need to do? So to my mind, India's growth story has largely been on the services sector. India needs to actually ensure that it becomes a manufacturing nation. And to become a manufacturing nation, you need to get size and scale of manufacturing, and you need to create another about 15 to 20,000, 50,000 large manufacturing companies in India who do the size and scale. And when large companies come in, they create their own momentum of backward-forward linkages. So you'll have Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 manufacturers. So you will then have a number of MSMEs, but large companies are critical to my mind, and therefore manufacturing is critical. But more important is that India has been a very reluctant urbanizer, and therefore India has to push for sustainable urbanization in a very big way. And sustainable urbanization means that urbanization will have to be done on the back of public transportation, that you'll have to create public transportation on the back of which urbanization will take place. You'll have to recycle your waste, and water, and much of this urbanization will have to be pushed by states of India. It's a state subject, and therefore you need champion states who will push for smart urbanization. And the third key thing to my mind is that we need to enhance our agricultural productivity, because India is one country which has a very high proportion of workers in the agriculture sector. Close to about 40% of our population is dependent on agriculture. Agriculture means poorly paid jobs. You need to take them out of agriculture, put them into manufacturing, put them into urbanization. And therefore, if you want to increase productivity in agriculture, not merely that you want to take workers away from agriculture into other areas, but you need to focus on value addition. That means you need to create the food chains. You need horticulture, you need floriculture, you need dairy productivity to go up so that farmers can enhance their earnings from a range of value-added services. So agriculture will also be the key. And the fourth key aspect, which is very critical to my mind, is that in India, if India is to grow at 3-decade period, then you need a huge focus on improving learning outcomes, which remain very poor in India. India has been able to provide access of education to 1.4 billion people, but the learning outcomes still leave a lot to be desired, and therefore many of these recent studies of ASA and NAS, what they demonstrate is that a class 4 student, class 10th student is not able to do class 4 maths and physics and chemistry. So you are passing and getting on to the next class and the next class and the next class without basic comprehension. Only 15 to 20% students are able to comprehend. And therefore, learning outcomes has to be the key focus in the coming years. Secondly, health outcomes have to improve very radically in India. And I think some key schemes of the government, like the Primary Health and Wellness Center, which has been started, or the Ayushman Bharat insurance scheme, will make a huge difference in the coming years. And the third key aspect, to my mind, is ensuring that our nutritional standards improve radically. That is, we are able to do away with stunting, wasting, and that would mean that we are able to track every single pregnant woman till the point of delivery, and from the point of pregnancy to the point of delivery, and then take care of the child for the first 5 years. And that means state governments again will have to play a key role. So good urbanization, focus on manufacturing, pushing for exports, even in a moment when there is a global slowdown, and improving learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutritional standards, all are going to be key challenges for India to be able to grow at those rates. But, India is a very large country. It's bigger than 25 countries of Europe, plus another 30,000 kilometers. And therefore, it's not just the central government. The states will have to play a key role. It can't be that one part of India is growing rapidly, the southern or the western part of India, and the eastern part of India is not growing. It's not possible. Or the northern part of India is not growing at a high rate. And therefore, it's very important that we need to create champion states. You need at least 12 states of India to grow at rates of about 10% plus for 3-decade period. If about 12 states of India grow at those rates of about 10 to 11% for a 3-decade period, India will grow. And that means that the next bit of reforms which have to be carried out will have to be carried out by state political leadership. There has to be a huge political and administrative will for states to carry out major structural reforms, much like what Centre has done in the last 9 years. The next 5 years have to be the story of Indian states driving growth, progress, and prosperity. And that means that you need political leadership which will drive change, which will drive reforms, where good governance becomes good politics in Indian states. And that, to my mind, is very critical. So, ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that if India, it's not about India on this high table leadership during G20, it's about putting India at a high leadership for a 3-decade period, 4-decade period, to ensure that this leadership remains there. The challenge is to be able to grow at very high rates, to be able to lift not only your GDP, but the per capita income of your citizens, and you need to carry forward this reform story for a very, very long period of time. And that is what I've dwelt upon. I am a believer in multilateral systems, and I believe that multilateralism is key to the global growth of global economy, and that's why India, despite many challenges which were confronting the world at that point of time, India did its G20 in a very different manner. We believed that this is not just an elitist body. It needs to be taken to the people of India, and we need to take our foreign policy to the citizens of India, and therefore we did over about close to 220 odd meetings in almost every state and union territory of India. We involved schools, colleges, everyone together in this. And despite all the challenges of geopolitics, challenge of energy transition, climate action, we were able to eventually bring everybody together. We had 83 paras. We had about close to 224 outcomes of the Indian G20. Despite all the complexities in the world, we were able, the multilateral system works on consensus. If you're not able to arrive at a consensus, even if you are one opposition country, there is no agreement, and therefore the multilateralism fails. So at a point of time when the United Nations had failed, India brought all the countries together to bring consensus on all the 83 paras. We're the only country which brought consensus on every single para. And we ensured that multilateralism succeeds. And therefore, what India did was to ensure that even on a very contentious issue like the Russia-Ukraine para, it took us, all that one particular para took us about 300 hours of negotiation. It took us over about 260 bilateral meetings. It took us about 16 drafts which had failed. The 17th one succeeded. We took it to this ultimate level, but we ensured that the Russia-Ukraine para was fully brought by consensus across G7, Russia, China, all emerging markets together. And that demonstrated India's great ability to be a leader on the high table. And to my mind, no other country could have succeeded at that point of time because India was able to bring every emerging country together. It was not just India's success, it was a success of Brazil, it was a success of South Africa, it was a success of Indonesia. All of us worked together to bring everybody together. And that, to my mind, demonstrated India's great ability. And that could happen because India had built up its stature. The Prime Minister had a stature, the Prime Minister had a standing. The Prime Minister's ability to push reforms in India had given us the positioning and our ability to carry brinkmanship, to do hard negotiations, to carry it late till late in the night, and to be able to bring everybody along to build consensus was possible because India demonstrated its leadership in driving economic growth. And without economic growth, you can't have global leadership. And therefore, what we demonstrated in G20 was our ability to achieve much of this success because we had done structural reforms, because we were a leader in clean energy, because we were a driver of infrastructure, and because we were a country which was driving, we were an oasis of growth in the midst of a barren economic landscape. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for your invaluable insights. I'm Mansh Pinchal from Open Global University, pursuing BA Honors Global Affairs, first year student. So my question is regarding in the light of recent telephonic conversation between PM Modi and Russian and Ukrainian president, India was invited by both the leaders to mediate. And as the peace summit is scheduled to take place in Switzerland in the month of June, so according to you, how do you think India should take this opportunity? As Professor Nevin Kumar have also pointed out that you should never raise the crisis. So how do India should participate? What the level of participation should be there that India should be doing in this particular summit? Thank you so much.
So, it's the Russia-Ukraine issue is a very complex issue. It's a complex issue because there are issues of territorial sovereignty. It's an issue of political independence. Many other challenges come in. It's an issue which touches the very basic principles of the United Nations. And you can have it's not possible to have a settlement between Russia and Ukraine without the United States of America and Europe. Ukraine is being supported by United States of America fully. It's being financed, it's being supported by Europe because they feel that it's a threat to Europe and to international peace. So I think the more important question is you get into a solution when all parties are willing. You can be a peacemaker when all parties are willing. And you can be a peacemaker and a successful peacemaker. You should only get in when the chances of your success are very high. You get in only not because Russia and Ukraine are requesting you. You'll get in and do that settlement when America, Europe all want you to become the negotiator. It's important. It's not a fight between merely Russia and Ukraine. Understand and comprehend the character of that war. It's a war which is being fully backed by Europe and United States. So you make your assessment whether you'd like India to get in at this stage.
My question is, does the Indian government plan to rebuild the agriculture marketing infrastructure to, say, improve price discovery and trade transparency, considering that India is the largest producer of wheat, rice, pulses, milk, vegetables, and oilseeds globally? Thank you.
So India has actually done a lot of work around this, building up the marketing infrastructure to ensure that during the COVID period, our farmers do not get impacted. We were able to provide direct benefit transfer to them. A lot of agri infrastructure has been created. But, we built up a policy regime which was built for the green revolution around rice and wheat. But since then, a lot has changed. We procure all that rice and wheat and is put into the godowns of the Food Corporation of India, which then supplies. That is the structure which has been built up. But now what has happened is that we are not only producing for ourselves, but we are exporting wheat and rice. And rice is also leading to taking out water from below the ground level. So in Punjab, you reached a level, almost 85% of our water is going for agriculture production. So that's why this whole huge focus on millets now. And what we are trying to build up is more a market-oriented economy where you can get into more value-added production. The farmers will benefit if they get into, as I said, increasing their earning from dairy sector, increasing floriculture, including floriculture or horticulture. All these are critical for India. And, it's important that we do greater diversification in Indian agriculture now.
Hi, I'm Suchetan, the editor of Outlook Business. You mentioned the very strong growth figures that we've been posting has been overstreet 4 quarters of robust growth we have been showing. The private sector balance sheets have never looked this well. They're deleveraging their debt and they're doing it very well. But when do you think that gross private capital formation will increase significantly as a proportion to GDP? We've been waiting now for a year.
No, I think I've been analyzing this. Your investment rates have gone up quite substantially now, and to my mind, that cycle has started kicking in now. And you will see this in a range of areas. I mean, you're seeing this in many of the PLI-led sectors. You've seen this in mobiles. You've seen this in battery manufacturing. You've seen this in infrastructure sector. And many of these sectors, actually, to my mind, the sunrise areas of growth are very critical for India. So all these tech-related sectors are very critical. And you will see once that it started kicking in, and once it accelerates the pace, you will have that virtuous cycle for about over a decade.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
That is, we see a lot of investment coming into sectors where there is PLI and also technology. But when it comes to infrastructure, do you think it's been a case of once bitten and forever shy? Because we know that was the sector which initially indexed to the twin balance sheet problem that we had.
Yeah, so it's very important that government creates infrastructure. But government is not good at operation and maintenance. And therefore, we came out with a scheme for asset monetization. And actually, the government has pushed, if you look at the National Highway of India, is putting out about close to 48,000 kilometers of roads for private sector to operate and maintain. That's the way to go, because you have had a challenge of PPP projects earlier. So let government create top-class infrastructure, give it out to the private sector through a transparent bidding process for operation and maintenance. And that's what's happening in the coal sector. That's what's happening in the mining sector. The number of coal mines and the number of mining leases that India has given out is a record level, actually.
So, I sent Alex area. Aayog guidance I was serving as the head of delegation called the G20. And also a proud alumni of the same institution as you and Srinam said. So, my question to you is twofold. What is the significance of the convening hour of these conferences? Obviously, we saw that as at the G20, but partly a lot of that lies with the United States. And moving forward, as we are planning to host COP33 and COP28, what is the broader approach that India can take
in sort of getting that convening power for a lot of these major negotiations?
No, convening power is enormous because it's very enormous because the Brazilian ambassador is sitting here, and I want to say the power is enormous because so far the agenda for the world was being set by the developed world. This is your opportunity to set the agenda for the world. You are holding the pen, and therefore, if you look at the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, it's an agenda, it's a declaration for the global South. If India had not been driving the G20, the world would not have seen African Union as a member of G20. It's India who made it G21 and included African Union as a member and ensured that it becomes a more inclusive G20. So you are setting the agenda for the rest of the world. You are driving the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. You are driving the key issues. And therefore, the responsibility on the country is enormous because you are the true driver of global consensus. And the first time in the world that you are having four emerging markets, one after another, holding the G20. So it's not a G7 club. And that's why I think G7 is very elitist in character. G20 is very inclusive, and it covers almost about 88% of the global population.
I just want to ask Mr. Kant, how much pushback are we seeing diplomatically over India's current positioning as leader of the global South, as giving global models like DPI, etc.? Because there seems to have become a sudden spate of stories about India and the US and us transgressing bounds, etc., which have been coming out yesterday. Domestically, maybe playing out well, but globally and diplomatically, do you think this is part of a larger pushback to India's new position on the global stage?
Well, I was in the United Nations just a few days back for the Citizen Stack launch, and I saw no pushback at all on that. I mean, as long as you're creating a great product which is actually transforming lives of citizens, which is able to ensure that you're able to do direct benefit transfers, you're able to do fast payments, you are able to actually ensure that you're able to do 30 seconds transactions, and you're able to provide insurance in 1 minute. A good economic model will be accepted by everyone because you're keeping the data with the citizens. So it's something which everybody from, and I interacted with a vast range of academic intellectuals from Stanford to Northeastern to Harvard. All of them said that this is a model to go forward with. And so I don't see any. I mean, you may have some pushbacks on some other issues, but not on issues where India's, issues of energy transition or issues of digital public infrastructure, they'll be well accepted.
Good evening. Thank you for your very enlightening presentation. Would like just to connect with one of the observations made regarding convening power. I myself have gone through an experience of advising the boss regarding G20 some years ago, and I recall how it's important to have the convening power. I think India showed, and holding the pen makes the difference. I recall that I'm not going to mention which presidency it was, but it was the former G7 country, which was an uphill battle just to insert the term biofuel on the summit declaration. We wanted just to include this word, and it was very difficult because we were not holding the pen.
This question I'm going to ask you, I would not have asked anybody else, but I'm comfortable to ask you because you're a very open-minded person. So we are talking about India being on the high table. And when you are at the high table, one of the things that happens is that people are going to scrutinize you. People are going to hold you to very high standards. People are going to even criticize you. And people are going to ask you tough questions. My question to you is that, are we prepared to behave like a person in the high table and to recognize that if you are going to be playing the big game, people are going to be more rigorous in your actions? Because the reason I'm asking this question is that sometimes I end up feeling that we are very insecure about criticism that comes around. And we probably need to be more sagacious and more a person like in the high table than we deal with criticism. Your comments.
So let me first say that if you want to succeed on the high table, which we did during G20, was because you have to be thoroughly prepared. I mean, you have to be more knowledgeable than any other country. I mean, you have to know their country positions. What is the stand they've taken in previous multilateral negotiations? So we didn't hire outside consultants like McKinsey or Bain or BCG. We built up a solid team of insiders, young people who became they were outstanding young professionals who worked with us. And I think we were better prepared than any other country to negotiate. So without that strength, without that confidence, without that capacity, you can't negotiate. Number two is that, there were a range of issues. I mean, you're dealing with 250 issues. Now, there's a lot of give and take going on all through, but you have to understand what are your core issues on which you want to push through. And those issues you will not succeed without your ability to do bilateral negotiations. I mean, if you think you're going to do only multilateral negotiations, it will not work. So you need to build up confidence. We were talking to China separately. We were talking to Russia separately. We were talking to emerging markets separately. We were talking to G7 separately. And within G7, there were different positions. So you have to have that ability and the confidence to build equations with every single Sherpa, every single negotiator across the table. And the third is, we were taking their advice, we were taking their inputs, we were taking their guidance, we became friends, we became enemies, we became, hard negotiators. I mean, several times Sherpas walked out. I had to go and convince them, we brought them back, but that's the way the negotiation works. We almost came to blows. One day before, we came to blows one day before the leaders, even when the leaders landed up, we took the meeting till about 12:30 in the night, and I had to tell them that you take it or leave it now. And if you don't accept it, then please ask your leader to talk to my Prime Minister. I've got the approval of my Prime Minister. You had to do very hard, very, very tough, hard. You have to have steel of nerves. Your nerves have to be made out of steel, otherwise it won't work. It was absolutely ruthless, brutal negotiations. Criticism is a very minor part of it. You have to go through many surgical operations.
I'm Stephen Marks, the Dean of the School of Public Health and Human Development, and with that title, you can guess my questions. Questions simply this. You have enumerated the enormous challenges and India's fantastic ambition to maintain 9 to 10% growth rate by, as you put it, growth through manufacturing and the private sector and all of these matters. And as Jean Sriram was explaining, carve out a model that's different from the Chinese and the American model. However, part of the interpretation of what you've said suggests that it's more or less the American model. If it is growth for growth's sake only through manufacturing and private sector, what happens to human development? What happens to the health sector?
I'm a great believer in improving learning outcomes and health outcomes, and that's why I dwelt on that. I dwelt on also nutrition, and I said why stunting, wasting has to be eliminated in India if India has to be on the high table for a long period of time. And I'm a great believer in Human Development Index, and I strongly believe that without that, this transformation cannot happen. But this was not a talk on Human Development Index. It was Human Development Index is one component of your growth story, and I'm a believer that actually. The challenge is not about spending. Let me tell you this. The challenge is not about resource allocation. For you to achieve better health outcomes, you need better state capacity, you need better governance, you need your ability to use data, real-time data, on a minute-to-minute basis to track and actually put that data in public domain. And I'm a great believer in data for good governance. And I'm not a believer in large allocations of money. A lot of allocation of money is badly spent in India. Your allocation you're talking about without taking into consideration the allocations which are made by the state governments. And these are state subjects. And therefore, I'm a great believer that state capacity to implement learning outcomes and health outcomes and using data for governance is the key to success in these areas.